welcome to the Metamorphics podcast. I'm joined by Wystan, somebody who has meditated a lot and teaches meditation. Wystan, welcome.
Thank you. That's correct. I have meditated a lot, and I do now teach meditation full-time professionally. Yeah, you asked for my bio, or like a blurb to give at the beginning of this podcast, and that's about the size of it. Was very miserable for a very long time. Got really into meditation, kind of monomaniacally focused on it. Spent about 2.5 years between monasteries in the Buddhist tradition, mostly Zen, a little bit of Theravada. And yeah, I've been all over the place, but now I teach secular meditation, or meditation in a secular kind of framing, coming through Shinzen and that teacher training program and that sort of approach, while still continuing with my own kind of religious practice as my own personal commitments and frameworks.
Yeah, and there's a lot to that, and would love to eventually learn a little bit about Shinzen, about some of your background in terms of meditation, and the what school specifically would you say you're kind of a
Jack of all trades.
Jack of all
Eclectic.
trades.
Eclectic is correct. These days, I'm mostly putting my time and energy into continuing training in Dzogchen, translated as the Great Perfection, or Ati Yoga, it's Sanskrit, but Dzogchen in Tibetan, and the kind of supplementary or auxiliary practices from Buddhist Tantra. That's where most of my formal practice is these days. And then also some still connected to Zen. And, that's a large part of my background, so I continue going off on retreat and doing that kind of thing too.
That's great. I want to definitely dive into all of those specific threads. Like, I think Deity yoga would be fun to talk about. I think awakening versus psychological growth would be fun to talk about. And maybe want to deep dive into mindfulness. Wystan is a treasure trove of knowledge, so I'm excited to have him here. First, though, I was hoping you could guide myself and the listeners through some kind of meditation for somebody who could be standing, sitting, lying down, walking.
Whether standing, sitting, walking, or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. No, I stumbled a bit there, but that's a direct quote from the man himself, Shakyamuni Buddha. That's from the Metta Sutta. We're not going to be doing metta, but we are going to be doing a practice that is portable, works with any situation. So you can call it an open awareness practice, or see, hear, feel, all. So if you're walking, just keep on walking. If you're sitting, then you can adjust yourself into a more comfortable posture. If you're not perfectly comfortable already, if you're lying down, then relax. If you're standing still, keep on doing that. And I'm going to suggest we do this one eyes open. And staring, straight ahead, not up, not down, not left, not right. If you can, if you know how, just defocus your eyes so that you're not fixated in a pointed way on any part of the visual field. You can just let the light kind of flood in without focusing on any particular visual object. If you like, as a way to make sure that your, kind of visual awareness, your eyes are defocused and your awareness is kind of opened up to the whole space of seeing, you can take 2 fingers up and kind of play with them at the edge of your peripheral vision. And so you should be able to see them both pretty clearly simultaneously at the edge. Maybe that's a little bit difficult to get across over just audio, but hopefully you get a sense. And if not, then don't worry too much about it. And what I'm going to invite everyone listening and us recording to do is just to take a couple deep breaths in and out, extending the exhale a little bit longer than you normally would. This can contribute to a kind of settling. Blink as often as you need to. And after you've taken a couple of intentional deep breaths, just rest and open your awareness to encompass as much of your field of experience at once as you can. Any bodily sensations that come up, you can hold and embrace those in this open space of awareness. Any emotions, any thoughts, like bubbles rising from the bottom of a pond, popping on the surface. Your vision open, even, relaxed, spacious. Body at ease, in motion or at rest. Calm, alert, clear, wakeful. And if attention moves or drifts between different objects in the senses, it's fine. But if you notice it lands and sticks somewhere, kind of invests in a specific spot, you can gently release and open back up to encompass more of this broad, open focus. We could just continue like this for another minute or two. Doing this kind of practice, we can sometimes step back into a feeling of being a detached spectator, or if we're not getting lost in the movements of our minds, in the arising and passing of objects of the senses. There's a middle way, neither pulling back nor grasping after the changing flow of experience. So without pulling away, without grasping after, what is it to just rest? been a couple of minutes. If you want to reorient yourself, you can. And as you continue to listen to us begin to converse again, you can maintain more of that broadened awareness, if you like. Remain sensitive to your own body, the changing contents of experience.
Thank you, Wystan. That was good. With that, I wonder if it would be apt to transition to mindfulness. So what we did was, in some way, involved mindfulness. And I think in pop psychology and just our current culture, I would say mindfulness has been perhaps misrepresented. And what's the term? McMindfulness to
McMindfulness.
Refer to the kind of commodification and
the commercialization, commodification, propagation of. Oh well, I mean, a small section of meditative contemplative traditions that has been kind of stripped of cultural context and religious affiliation, and then marketed and sold. That's the meaning of McMindfulness.
Yeah. I wonder if you could right now just answer the question, what is mindfulness?
What is mindfulness? So, depends on who you ask. If you ask Shinzen, Shinzen is kind of working with the cultural cachet of the term mindfulness. So the system of meditation that he teaches, that he has formulated over his decades of teaching and practice, between mostly Buddhist traditions, but that's where he's mostly coming from, but also several others. He uses the phrase unified mindfulness. So it's meant to be kind of a comprehensive system that is secular in terminology, that both ancient and modern, you can encompass all of that territory within a unified vocabulary and framework. I think he's done it pretty well. So for him, mindfulness is this very, very broad endeavor that actually has all of that depth. He's using the term in that way. What you'll probably more often find is present moment non-judgmental awareness or something like that, which is fine. That's good. Present moment non-judgmental awareness is great. And it's also not terribly specific. That doesn't actually suggest a practice, or much less a framework, or I think it it doesn't give away at first blush the depth that is possible, that is available. And mindfulness in a classical Buddhist sense, where the term that people use is mindfulness is sati in Pali, or smriti in Sanskrit, other terms in other languages. But it means, it's related to the word memory. It means to recollect, like literally, to recollect the mind, to notice, oh, I've wandered. I'm going to recollect, literally, regather around my meditation, my intention. So mindfulness in a Buddhist context is not synonymous with meditation. It's just a faculty that is necessary to meditate, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And some folks may not be familiar, but there's a term called right mindfulness.
Yeah.
What is
that? For all of these terms, there's right mindfulness or right concentration. Yeah, I mean, I'm more familiar with the going into it on right concentration, but generally, all of these mental factors that you employ in meditation are equally employed in unwholesome acts, right? So, I mean, in Buddhism, in a religious context, and arguably everywhere, all of these acts of body and speech and mind, they have a moral valence to them. There are no neutral acts, as it were. It's like either this act of mind, of attention, is wholesome and leading to peace, leading to freedom, leading to liberation, leading to the benefit of self and other, or it's just kind of a dud. It's not doing much, and I guess that's kind of neutral. Or it's actively causing you and others harm, leading towards unwholesomeness in some way. So the employment of the term right, when it's appended to right concentration or right mindfulness or right livelihood, it's explicitly to do with virtue, to do with ethically upright conduct in a way that is reductive of suffering for oneself and for others. That's the primary criterion. The flourishing of positive states, the reduction of unwholesome, unpleasant states of body, of mind, of society, of livelihood, etc.
That's interesting. To me, what is most interesting is, there's a couple threads in that. One is that mindfulness is not just this independent kind of panacea for all wounds. It's embedded within a system, it's embedded within a context of other faculties that are kind of working together synergistically. And I think I was hearing you say concentration, effort, and kind of the ways in which, the ways in which these
the Eightfold Path, in Buddhism, that's the framework.
What is the Eightfold Path, by chance? I wonder if you could.
Well, I'm not actually a Buddhist teacher. I operate. I'm happy to speak on my experience in that religious context, and that is mostly where I'm coming from. I don't make any bones about that. But also, if you're interested in Buddhist teachings specifically, I'm encouraged by some of my religious teachers to teach some of what they've taught me, and I'll do that. But if you're looking for basic Buddhist teachings, I would suggest checking out Bhikkhu Bodhi, or just Google. If you want to know what the Eightfold Path is, Google the Eightfold Path. Read the Wikipedia article. It's pretty good.
It's on Wikipedia. Yeah.
Yeah, I could rattle off the list: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. There you go. There's the list, but it's just a list, and without that kind of broader structure informing it.
It's very interesting that mindfulness of all of the Eightfold Paths is what kind of got picked up by.
It's the most kind of culturally neutral. It's the most easily extracted, and then it comes with the least baggage culturally or religiously speaking, right? So you can say to someone, you can be Christian and you can totally practice mindfulness, which is absolutely true. The Christianity has a deep contemplative tradition, which they don't use the word they don't use the word mindfulness, but the similar parallel lines of contemplative development exist in every religious tradition, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've once heard mindfulness described as the energy of the Holy Spirit.
That's interesting.
Kind of took me back a little bit. So I want to respect that. So you are
a religious practitioner, a secular teacher.
Exactly, and so that you're kind of walking a line here of what you would consider yourself viable to teach, and then also you have your own religious practice that you engage in, that
which I'm happy to talk about.
Teach. Yeah.
But if you're looking for a primer on Buddhist doctrine, I will be happy to give you resources. Or if you're looking for a Buddhist religious teacher, again, and often do, people come to meet with me and they're happy or they're comfortable or they're already kind of in that religious sphere. And if someone is looking for a teacher who teaches in that mold, I can happily refer people onwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe we could go into that of what is your practice? What do you generally engage in for practice?
Yeah, so Dzogchen primarily, which is, what can I say that won't be deceptive or misleading? So there's several different kinds of Dzogchen to begin with. It's an internally diverse religious tradition, but the kind that is most popular these days, and has been for a couple of centuries, is something called I'm going to get into the weeds here. Sorry, I can't help. Menakde, or the unsurpassed cycle. That's not a direct translation, but it's referred to in different ways. It's historically, arguably, a later development. There are two primary practices within Menakde. There's the practice of trekchod, or sometimes called cutting through, to primordial awareness. Rigpa is the term that's often used. If folks are familiar with Sam Harris, he's a practitioner and a proponent of Dzogchen. And if you hear him talking about selfless awareness, or recognizing that there's no self, or noticing the centerlessness of consciousness, or all there is consciousness, non-dual with its contents, he's talking about trekchod, he's talking about Rigpa. And then the other part of that path is Togal. And there are preliminary practices and supplementary practices like deity yoga, like devotional practices. But those are the two main bits of that path: trekchod and Togal.
Okay. Yeah,
Togal is more of a visionary practice, which if you can Google that if you want to. I'm not going to talk about it here.
There's a lot there, and so I think maybe I want to just take it one at a time, and again, I'm coming from my own background, which I might have to I'm going to suppress some of my own. There's part of me that wants to get really nerdy about this, but I'm also aware that not everybody will be familiar with.
I mean, I just came out with a mile a minute jargon there, so. I can actually here. Let's make it more concrete. Actually, so what does that actually mean? When I say I practice Dzogchen, what am I doing? I'm much like we were doing at the beginning of this session. Actually, I'm sitting, or I'm walking, or I'm lying down, or I'm standing still, and eyes open. You can do it eyes closed. Mostly eyes open though, and just resting in a state of open, clear, wakeful, empty cognizance. When I say empty, I mean empty of fabricated intent for some result, empty of pretty much everything except the bare arising of the six senses. And it's a non-doing type practice where you're settling into the natural state and resting there, resting in a kind of recognition of the nature of your own mind. And maybe that sounds hopelessly abstract. It means something very specific.
So I want to be kind of poking here, and why would I want to do that?
Why would you want to do that?
What am I going to get in return?
Freedom. In a word, freedom. Freedom from dis-ease. Dzogchen is Buddhism. And Buddhism's primary concern is dukkha, suffering and the end of suffering. So, like all Buddhism, Dzogchen has its distinctive methods, but it's concerned with suffering and the end of suffering.
So we suffer, and there is an end to that.
Well, I mean, maybe to bring in Shinzen's perspective here, suffering equals pain times resistance. He has this wonderful equation. So pain. Sorry, no, you have there's this body that is going to be in pain depending on how well you take care of it, whether you have an unfortunate accident or illness, age happens. So pain is non-negotiable. The resistance to that pain, emotional, psychological, physical, kind of has a multiplicative effect on the pain itself, and turns that into misery, anguish, anxiety, depression, everything that people find most people unless they're chronically ill or are approaching death or have serious health issues, most people suffer from psychological and emotional distress. Um, Distress at the world, distress at the state of their relationships, distress at their psychological dysfunction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the freedom from suffering that is promised is not the freedom from embodiment, at least not in this life. If you take a traditional religious view, like yes, that too. But in this life, while the body's still kicking, there's temporary freedom from embodiment in altered states. Great, you can learn those. But the lasting freedom is freedom from self, freedom from the one that is unfree.
I think that's really an important point, and one that I'm sure most people are familiar with, probably in the context of ego. You gotta lose
Sure.
your ego about this, or ego death. And I think that what you're talking about here is a little bit different. And I wonder if we could talk about what is selflessness,
Sure.
or what is the self. And because I think from at least from my background as a psychotherapist, we treat the self and its pathologies.
Right.
And we treat it in a much different way than the way it's prescribed by the Buddha.
Yeah, quite.
So how does how does Buddhism view the self, and what is it? And
sure. And this also goes into unified mindfulness, right? So unified mindfulness is unique, as far as I'm aware, in secular kind of mindfulness, that it goes to this depth as well. So I'm going to be, drawing on Buddhist vocabulary because that's what you're asking about, but the same kind of depth exists in unified mindfulness and Shinzen's system. And you could talk about all of this in perfectly secular terms if you chose to, and back it up with contemporary cognitive science and neuroscience. And that's ongoing research, some of which I'm collaborating on, which is very exciting. Remind me of the question. What is the self? What is selflessness? Right. Okay. So the self at root, at base in the Buddhist tradition is, one way of phrasing it is the conceit I am, which is based in this fundamental split in experience between a knowing subject and a known object. Here I am. This is me right here, obviously. Hello. And I've got this teacup and I'm looking at the teacup. I am looking at the teacup. Here I am. There it is. And that fundamental dualism between me, not me, here and there, this and that, that is what is cut through. That's what's eliminated. Eliminated, relaxed, released. That is what is seen through and eventually worn down to the extent that it no longer arises through, classically soteriologically focused Buddhist practice. And if you take, a secular mindfulness practice like Shinzen's system to a great depth, then also you will encounter selflessness. And you could phrase that all kinds of different ways, and you might have all kinds of different experiences along the way to that, and interpret it any which way you like. But where mystical and contemplative traditions agree is that this sense of a self separate from reality, or separate from God, or separate from the earth, or separate from, and I like Buddhism, it's my religious tradition. So of course I think it's the bee's knees. I think it goes most directly and deeply, most frequently, and has a lot of great methods and frameworks for dealing with that whole project. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm really liking that you're touching on dualism, subject-object dualism.
And dualism between absolute and relative reality as well. It's not like there is no metaphysical dualism here between a transcendent reality and this here. That also is transcendent. Subject-object dualism can be temporarily transcended in a psychedelic state, in a deep meditative absorption, temporarily. You can be free from that sense of I am. You can be merged in a kind of unity of experience with the wall, with your breath, with a light, even in more ordinary experiences of, making love or going to a concert and feeling kind of in some way unified. This cuts deeper. This goes to the root and severs that root out of which that whole structure grows. Of any separation between anything.
Right. I think what you're saying, I think for some will be really intuitive, and they might be familiar with dualism and non-dualism, but for others, it could be, you could hear this and say, okay, so I am going to then just achieve the state. I'm going to stop being dual. I'm going to stop this knowing and known separation. And then almost like I'm getting on a plane and going somewhere else.
Right.
I'm gonna leave this body, and go.
I'm here
else.
now, and I'm going to go someplace else where there's this special non-dual place or state or reality that's not this. I'm going to go there.
Right.
At some future time.
Exactly. And so what I'm hearing you say is that that's not what non-dualism is.
I mean, some non-dual traditions are like that, sort of. Non-dual as well is this underdefined term that varies actually between different traditions. So the kind of non-dualism that I'm talking about is the Sanskrit term is advaya, different from Advaita, actually.
I would love to have a whole good discussion about that. I think we'd get quite in the weeds.
That's a little more in the weeds. But and it's people will debate, is this just a conceptual distinction between these different forms of non-dualism, or is there a real, mystical, phenomenological, experiential distinction? And I can tell you for a fact, over the course of my own practice, there were many times along the way I thought, aha, this is it. And no.
Yeah, it's so nuanced and fascinating for me doing therapy. The goal of therapy, and there's probably indefinite goals in therapy dependent on the therapist, the lineage, training. However, generally speaking, they're not framing this as the goal of therapy is to realize, to see through the illusory separateness between subject and object.
I don't know many therapists who come out with that. No.
Yeah, no,
maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, it's a topic of interest of mine in my own practice. I don't tend to bring it into my therapy sessions, partly because I don't feel qualified to steer people through those waters at the moment. And I think, generally when someone's coming to, this is really interesting actually, when someone's coming to a therapist, they usually have a problem, and the problem is generally outside themselves, or it's located somewhere within themselves. Again, in both cases, there's a self, and there's a not me. There's a me, there is a not me. Maybe that not me is inside of
or there's a
myself,
part of me. Yeah.
Part of me I can't control. It's doing these things I don't want it to do. And there's ways in which actually going down to that dualistic level and getting into the nitty-gritty particulars of it is tremendously helpful.
Of course, yeah.
And it's different than actually just seeing through the illusion that there is a separateness at all. And it makes me wonder, too, people who do have that realization can still engage in perhaps unethical or in ways that are blind to the impact of their actions.
Yeah, you can have this phenomenological shift in a temporary or an abiding way and still fuck up. A lot. Happens routinely. This is the function of maintaining contact with people who are years and many decades your senior in this kind of practice, so that you're in close consultation with peers, with elders, who will let you know, hey, okay, great, you've come thus far, and what remains is the refinement, the deepening of this, and refining the implications of it throughout all aspects of your life, behaviorally, emotionally, relationally, bringing the implications of this fully out in every aspect of your life. If you don't do that, you've stopped. You've well, it's not even halfway.
There's a way in which, I think there's the kind of classic term of growing up versus waking up. And
sure.
Yeah, and I think
coming from Ken Wilber and some other folks,
yes.
I think,
Yeah, and I think that could be a good way of looking at it. Is in a way the non-dual isn't necessarily. I don't even know if I would categorize that as transpersonal. It certainly could
non-personal
fit in that category. Yeah, the way in which whether you're having a peak mystical or limit experience, or you're just doing the dishes, not non-duality. The knowing and a known dynamic could be present at any scale there,
right?
And you can still see through the duality.
Yeah, no. If it's the I don't necessarily want to say the real thing as though I'm devaluing everything else in relation to it, because I don't really want to do that. But if this has really gone deep, there's no difference whether you're in an absorbed, in a certain sense. Obviously, there are differences on a surface level, but at the deepest level, there is no difference between washing the dishes, going to the bathroom, and washing the dishes, and the deepest meditative state. That fundamental sense of separation, if it's gone all the way through, is gone in all of those cases, regardless of motion, of stillness, of activity, of rest, of meditating or not meditating. Yeah. Which doesn't translate, again, into perfect behavior. The path past that is bringing your behavior completely and constantly in line with the deepest implications of that recognition, of that realization, which doesn't stop until you stop breathing.
I think that's really an important point, and among the wisest people I've met have made those exact statements. Is there isn't a humility to their humanness.
Yeah.
Is that this exactly? There's a non-personalness to this. However, that does not get rid of your humanness and your ability to have blind spots. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
There's a way in which the me not me distinction can cease, and yet things can still be.
You still have baggage. You still have habits. You still have
hidden from view. Yeah, momentum that.
Subconscious forces that are driving your behavior. Absolutely.
But there seems to be, people I've met, talked to, and obviously I can't say anything about another person's experience, but you could even say people who have been, verified to teach, carry with them a certain presence, a certain. It is almost like when I'm speaking to them, it's as if they exist underneath me. There's just such a expanse that they exist within, or just emanate. And there's still ways in which they are not they're not a perfect person. That doesn't make them a perfect human being. And there's humility about that. And that seems to be really.
And if there isn't humility about that, it stinks. that person probably has issues.
Yeah, again, the transcendent proportion, the cosmic proportions of I am that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can take on, in some cases, it can take on really monstrous proportions. People can. This is how you get cults in some cases, right? Is someone?
It's very.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I worked. I don't know how much I want to share about my my work experience, but I certainly have worked with quite a few people who the phenomenological states they described sounded quite mystical.
Hmm.
Um, Unions with God, with what they would describe as fundamental reality, and coming out of that have identified with that. They
Yeah,
say
that's right. Oh, that's me.
that is
That's what
who
I
that's
am.
me. I am God.
Yeah.
I created this world. Me,
Me,
my
me.
human
Yeah,
self.
no, no.
Yes.
In that case, it's the seed of self is still operant. In fact, it's inflated up to the size of the whole universe, and
Right.
that's dangerous. That's not healthy.
I think it's important to talk about just. I would imagine too with the psychotechnology growing uh, at a rate that I don't think we're prepared for. Um,
Not well.
the
No.
amount of people who will in a way gets skyrocketed up into some and have it amazingly transformative experiences, and the way
Hmm.
that they make sense of that and they relate to that experience. There's something about that takes on this uh, I don't want to say ugly quality, but harmful, like actually very
Yeah.
dangerous and harmful relationship to uh, uh, their sense of self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, someone can be in like an ongoingly kind of transcendent state, and like be a massive narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
I've met a couple of these people, um, and in a sense, their ordinary sense of self is genuinely suspended, in a sense. But the
Uh-huh.
root of it that makes them kind of put themselves above everything. In fact, this world, everyone else, they're they're above, or they're deeper,
Uh-huh.
or they're beyond
Yes.
me. It's not pretty.
Yeah, I don't have to take accountability because I do not exist the way that you
Right.
exist.
Right. And
I think
you, the
I think
deluded
that's
one,
yes.
you can imagine how
Yeah.
this goes.
Yeah, you can see the way in which that just even logically the way it's framed can set you up for manipulation,
Yep.
grandiosity,
Yep.
really dangerous. And people who see that and see, oh, hey, there's it's kind of triggering the archetypal dad figure. It's like, oh,
Oh,
I've got this
absolutely. And they, yep,
all-knowing
yep.
father who's way beyond me. They can show me the way, and they'll follow them.
Yeah.
And I
And
think Carl
often these
Jung
people
actually talks
can
about.
temporarily embody, incredibly spacious, loving states that they can kind of broadcast to the people around them. There are people like that, and also the lights go off, the cameras off, and they're horrible to people around
It's
them,
so
right?
interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think Carl Jung talks about he calls it the mana personality, and by that I'm gonna butcher this, but it's like the mana being this sort of life force energy beyond the human,
Right.
just way beyond one human being. And some people will kind of grab hold of that. They'll have this sort of transformative experience and grab hold of it and say, "That's me.
Hmm.
I'm wearing the helm of this. I control this
Yeah.
mana." And he said that usually will actually kind of evoke students, that will evoke people who see you as the
Absolutely.
holder of the mana, bow
Yep.
to you, like you are God, not what you're pointing to. It's
Yep.
actually you and your particulars
Yep.
uh,
And
that
people will,
make the mana.
the teacher will play into that. They'll really like the adoration. They'll like the fact that people are fixating on them. Right. I mean, can
Yes.
you imagine? That would be very gratifying to a sense of a separate, insecure self.
It
To have a
really
whole bunch of
would
people
be.
look up to you in that way, right? And it's
It's
toxic.
in
It's
all
just
of us.
toxic.
It's in yes, it's toxic, and I think it's also important to recognize it's in that capacity is in all of us.
I know it from
We
the
were
inside, I
once.
should say, like projecting that onto my own teachers at various points,
Likewise, likewise.
and them shutting it down again and again.
Yeah, yeah, and I think of this is kind of just like me riffing here, but I think of the infant state, and I think of when we are in the infant state, we are incredibly dependent on our caregivers. But there's a lot of interesting psychoanalytic frameworks for understanding the infant sort of omnipotence. It's like I want and then I get. I want breast milk and then I get. I cry and then I do my thing and then I get it. And there's a sort of frustration that happens in that infancy period where we basically have this, like, it's kind of this magical, like, desire and want, and then we cry or scream and then it comes to us. And there's a frustration that happens where we start doing that thing and then it doesn't come. And there's this, like, wait, what? And then we have to sort of learn how to actually negotiate our needs, slowly coming into the impact of other people and reality and this otherness.
Right. And people,
and
a lot of people want they want to return to that kind of soupy, unitive state.
Because it feels great.
It feels great. It feels great, and it's a totally dependent, kind of non-functional state for an adult to be in. You can visit there. Learning to return to that is can be very nice. It can be very healing. And also, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what the Buddha was pointing to.
It's so important because I think a lot of psychoanalytic critiques of awakening have been, well, it's a desire to go back to the womb.
Yeah, no.
And yeah, I like the certain. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's really, really funny that critique comes out because literally, like word for word, it's you will stop descending into the womb, as in, like, cut short the cycle of rebirth. So it's like not returning to any state of dependency on anything. That's the goal. It's not returning to a regressed, infantile, unitive, dependent state at all. It's the opposite of that. It's cutting short that cycle of identification and therefore need for any reified thing at all and any reified self that needs. Not that, folks don't keep eating and, having preferences and satisfying them as best as they can. That still goes on. But it's that gap of frustration that you talk about, that lessens or disappears if it's genuine.
That's really interesting. As you were talking, I was reminded of that gap of frustration and how similar that could be to practice. Of that, it is a form of frustration. You go and you sit down and maybe you're staring at a wall or your eyes are closed or half open, and it's frustrating. You want something.
Yeah.
That's why you're there doing it.
Why else would you be doing this? Sitting still for many hours. Like, why the hell would you do this?
Yeah, what is it? Is it the pain of the contemplative that Buddha talks about? The I forget but there's a sort of yearning for this.
Absolutely,
for
and which was encouraged. By the way, this is another misconception that whenever it comes up, I try to address it. The Buddha encouraged people to practice for liberation as though a fire is upon their head, and one is striving to extinguish it. Like your head is literally on fire. Like that's the kind of death is coming. The urgency with which he advised people to take it up is no joke. So this whole relax, take it easy, chill out, that definitely was not what he was preaching. He really encouraged fervent desire for liberation constantly. And the teachers that I've sought out and worked with in, like, residential monastic settings, likewise, it's like this is a serious matter. It's the one great matter of life and death, is the Zen phrase, and resolving that. They call it the great death in Zen, dying while you're alive, so that you transcend the dualism of birth and death, of the self being born and dying. You put that to rest at the root.
I want to go into that more. However, I also want to talk about deity yoga.
Yes.
Because it aligns with it. It's kind of it's a sort of tightrope walk between what we were just talking about, which was the self in being inflated to godlike proportions.
Right.
And deity yoga is taking on the proportions of a deity, but it's different. But it's a fundamentally different state.
Yeah. So there's different kinds of deity yoga. There's one in which kind of the dualism is maintained conventionally, at least provisionally, in which you're kind of taking a devotional stance that would be more familiar to people in deistic traditions, where the focus is on a deity or a pantheon of deities. So there is that kind of devotional deity yoga. But more commonly and more emphasized is bringing that to kind of transform your own perception of your body, speech, and mind into that of an already awakened bodhisattva or Buddha. So you go through this kind of initiation process, which, depending on the teacher and how traditional and formal they are, might be a short or an extended thing that might have requirements in front of it. And then you receive the mantra of the deity, you receive an empowerment to do the practices associated with the deity, and you begin to, as best as you can, practice certain things and begin to experience your own body, speech, and mind as that of the deity you've been empowered to practice, that's been transmitted to you. So in the case of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, you would visualize yourself, and there are lots of different forms. But deity yoga is kind of a process of replacement. Replacement of our ordinary perception of ourselves as unhappy, stuck, spinning, samsaric, cyclically caught beings, transfiguring that perception in meditative absorption into that of a compassionate or passionate, like radiantly kind of already liberated being. It's kind of a fake it till you make it approach. And the fact that if you practice this, intensively, you can generate imaginally, using all your imagination, your powers of concentration, the fact that you can make the perception of yourself as a deity as vivid as waking life, right? It kind of clues you in. The insight comes along for the ride that, oh, my ordinary perception of myself as this limited, separate being is false. It's just as constructed as myself as the deity. So the true nature of all deities in deity yoga is just the nature of your own mind, which is empty, insubstantial, awake, fundamentally free at the basis. Yeah.
So there's a lot I want to say in response to that. Specifically, I think it was 3 steps to deity yoga: the mantra, empowerment, and then just practice.
Yeah, I'm not using specific I'm not using the correct terminology, and again, I'm not qualified to teach this stuff.
No,
so
yeah, exactly.
I practice it, but not if
Right.
you I could give you proper references if folks want it. But yeah.
And then what you're saying about the self-image is very interesting to me. In my psychotherapy practice, and rather than trying to get clients to this spot, recently I've just been asking this question, like, what size, like what's your size right now? Sometimes it just completely like whizzes past, like, what are you talking about?
Huh?
But so other times it just, like, that question gets people to reflect in a way where there's this reified self-image of body as being this, quote unquote adult body, and whatever that means. I honestly don't. I honestly don't think it has any bearings. But there's a sort of adult body, and maybe it's just a conglomerate of the way we see ourselves in the mirror, but also the way we see ourselves in relation to another person.
Yep.
Either way, though, when certain emotions and cognitions and body sensations are kind of in conflict, and it usually happens with trauma, is there's a sort of you could call it dissociation, but really what that means is a lack of association, lack of connection between our emotions, our cognitions, and our body. And so what I find, though, is that when people can really allow the self-image that sort of lets everything sort of like sort of kind of fit together. A lot of the times we kind of take on this image of like a little child.
Right.
We kind of take on the image of usually where trauma occurred, and we might feel really small, actually. But there's a self-image that's like, no, that's not me. I'm not a kid. You know, that's humiliating. I wouldn't do that. And
I wouldn't feel that way.
yeah, exactly. But what it's so interesting is that once we can start to let ourselves enter that and change our self-image to that of a child, the strength and the presence that opens up and the way that our hearts open up is profound.
Yeah. Similar kind of process.
I wonder if that's actually, there's a similar mechanism with
sounds like it.
With Deity yoga. Maybe the only difference is Deity yoga, there's a bit more intention there. There's a bit more study involved, and you're actually cultivating certain qualities for the intention.
Right, you're taking on the emotional.
Through.
Yeah, you're cultivating the affect of the deity as well. So if you're the bodhisattva of compassion, you've got the mantra running, you've got the body image. You might adopt certain hand gestures or bodily postures externally, or just feeling it internally. And it can become quite vivid, so that your actual perception, your proprioception of the body, even if you're stationary, in a normal sitting posture, you might feel yourself to be in a different posture, having your hands in different positions, etc., or having more limbs than you actually have. It can get pretty wild. But you're also embodying the affect of the deity and the confidence in liberation of the deity.
Exactly. And the difference maybe I see there is like there's kind of a purpose of for the purpose of liberation, but also for the purpose of tied into that seeing the emptiness of the self, seeing the emptiness of the self-image that we carry around all the time.
That's right.
Reify continually, and seeing these. Okay, this is kind of arbitrary. Like I don't actually have to be reified in this way.
I could reify in a different way as a blazing goddess of wisdom, or a car. Well, right. And there's also structures as well. Like if you're doing it, you might embody a whole mandala, right, and not just one deity. Although it's often focused on one kind of humanoid figure. But you could feel your whole body to be a crystal palace of light, for example. That's a common portion of some practices.
It's really cool. I did my undergraduate research paper on and study on embodiment and the malleability of embodiment, and it's extremely malleable. Especially in VR, you can experiment with getting people to take on entirely different bodies, different forms and shapes. And and the therapeutic value of that, I think, is perhaps gone unstudied. But I think being able to at least see the malleability of yourself gives you a fluidity. And so certain aspects of yourself that you don't want to be, because that's not me. Like I am not a little child. I am not dependent on anybody. I don't have sad feelings. I don't get scared.
Right.
Actually inhibits. It reifies. Like people might think that makes them strong, but in a way that reifies their self-image.
Resistance and reification. It's the same thing.
And so, I think some people, when they think of awakening, enlightenment, they're like, well, I will then be a strong kind of person who doesn't feel emotions, who doesn't get vulnerable or get affected by life.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, all the folks who've been at this hardcore, and I mean real hardcore, for decades and decades and decades, and I'm privileged to know a bunch of these folks. Like full-time teachers have trained their asses off for decades, constantly. Some of these people are quite, they're elderly now. No, their hearts are wide open. They're entirely vulnerable to everyone around them, in a sense. There isn't that barrier. They feel intensely, and at the same time, they're not touched by the sorrows of the world in the same way. It passes right through. They might feel grief very intensely, but it's like a gust of wind. It just, through an empty sky. Woof. And they can meet every person. that's in front of them and be there completely with them. Nothing held back. But as soon as that conversation ends, nothing lingers, nothing sticks. This is what I've observed in some of my own teachers. Yeah. I've seen them all cry.
Yeah, I wonder.
Like they,
cry.
Yeah, no, I mean, they feel.
It was very important to, I think, to speak that. I would imagine a lot of people who don't have a sangha and who really have been going at this alone, or just are kind of in their own, high abstract tower, disembodied, thinking that that's virtuous. Maybe don't understand that actually having an open heart doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you
No, it's courageous.
Insightful. Yeah, it's actually incredibly courageous to have an open heart in a world that can be violent, that can reject your open heart, deny it.
Yeah. And you see that pain in everyone around you, actually. And the more, I mean, this is the unpleasant part, actually, of coming more into embodiment, coming more into emotion, and lessening the preoccupation with yourself, kind of putting that down more and more, is you become, in some cases, excruciatingly sensitive. There can be transitional phases of excruciating sensitivity to just the immense oceans of pain that are just on display, and most people ignore. So one teacher I know, he was in a 3-year constant retreat, very transformative, wonderful, amazing. He comes out, he goes to Walmart, and he collapses in tears, and he doesn't stop crying for 2 weeks.
Right. The sensitivity is just so vast. And that's a sort of sensitivity.
And you don't stay there, I should say. It's like, right. He's fine.
You can go to Walmart now?
You go to Walmart, it's no problem. But it's like, I'm trying to think of an appropriate metaphor and failing. As the heart opens, it aches, and it feels more. It has more capacity to feel, actually. And then if at some point that doesn't transform how you live your life, like in your intimate relationships, but also in your engagement with everyone around you, with society, I tend to stay away from prescriptive statements, or I try. but it probably hasn't gone very deep if that hasn't happened.
I think that's also an important point. This isn't a isolated, and it certainly can be, in the cave kind of activity. This is something that, if it's going right, it transforms
right
all aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where you are at each moment, is
right
in your life
with others. You have been, and even that yogi living in a cave sometimes for decades, right? They come out, and what do? They devote their life in service to others. The people who actually go and do that. They're in that cave in the service of others, so that when they come out, they can show up for people in a way that very few people can.
And we come into being in relation to others, to otherness.
Yeah.
That is how we form our sense of self. This is kind of coming from a psychotherapist perspective. Maybe different. I think it's probably different in Buddhism. But even at the subject-object level, that for there to be me, there needs to be you.
Right.
Who I'm in relationship to.
Right. And though that is transcended in, the deepest sense on like an immediate sensory level, the way that that's transcended is not by like escape into some transcendent dimension. No, you might have temporary experiences like that. Those are temporary experiences that are dependent and conditioned, etc. No, I mean you are liberated into pure relationality, in which there isn't the fixation of the other and there isn't the fixation of self, but there's no distance at all. If that makes sense.
Well, it makes total sense. I think it's so important to emphasize that. And I just imagine too, like imagine my younger self could have really used this kind of conversation.
Me too. Because boy, I was really hoping for that pure pure transcendence and never being bothered with anything ever again, and just like escaping through a hole in the universe. Yeah. Exactly. Sorry.
Escape my humanity. No, it's 100%. I relate to that. Right. It can become a sort of, rather than a awakening, like a self-annihilation.
Yeah, which is a wrong view explicitly. It's called out that self-annihilationism, that is wrong view. Like unequivocally. There isn't a solid self here. There never was to annihilate. There's you're trying to like kill a ghost. Like what there's nothing there to anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. I think I kind of feel that we've reached a point that it kind of feels like we've hit a peak, and then now we're kind of
denouement
to a rest. Yeah, and I really liked this conversation. I would love to have more. I think there's so many threads we could go down. I particularly am interested in deity practice, the nuances of it. I'm aware you maybe need to be a little careful because you're not authorized to teach it.
Yeah, I won't give concrete practice instructions, but I mean I can discuss it in plenty of detail without actually going into instruction. So, and it's this odd line with these esoteric topics, because all of the information is available in some cases for free online. You know the terms, you can look it up and get all of this. Like none of it is functionally secret anymore.
Yeah, I could just go to Wikipedia and speak about what deity yoga is.
I think you won't find very good practice instructions on most of the internet, to be fair, but you can find it if you know where to look. It's out there, and at the same time, there is like important caution to be put on some of these transformative psychotechnologies. It's kind of funny calling them a psychotechnology. These very powerful practice, because there are like known failure modes of how this can go wrong, or how this can be psychologically, dangerous.
Right. That's kind of the entry where I would be interested in. I mean, yeah, because we could think of the psychotechnology like jhanas right now. They're kind of really big right now. And
sure. That is one of the things that I am authorized to teach.
That would be an interesting conversation. I think something that really, like, just through this conversation really became alive for me is the ego inflation that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, I think people see this in all forms of pathology, like many forms of certain psychopathology, of the ways in which I alone am God.
Right. Me, I'm the chosen one.
Right. Or the opposite, whereas I am worthless and bad. I need to destroy myself because I'm an illusion. I'm not real.
Exactly. And you find both of those tendencies like really harmfully expressed in spiritual seekers who don't have a community, don't have a teacher. Very, very common. Very, very common.
I would love to have like a whole conversation about that. I mean, we certainly don't have to, but it'd be fun. And also kind of the limits of healing. Healing versus awakening, and
I wouldn't call it versus. Let's do both.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, fruition view versus a developmental view is that we're a self going on a developmental path,
right?
Versus we're already here,
already complete
right now.
Yeah. Both are true.
Thank you, Wystan.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me on. I feel like I just ranted a whole lot.
It was a beautiful rant. So
okay. We can put links in show notes. People find you,
yes.
find me. Okay.
Yep. I'll have it in the YouTube description below for people to look and find you, find your, I think you have a link tree and
That's right.
website. Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Can work with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why anyone would want to do that.